You never really expect your best friend to turn into your competition, let alone beat you to the punch with your own work. But that's exactly what happened. I had spent weeks polishing my resume. I'm 26, fresh out of grad school in business administration, and living in Columbus, Ohio. The job market wasn't exactly forgiving, and every application felt like tossing a paper airplane into a storm. I wanted this particular opening at a mid-sized consulting firm more than any other. It was local, reputable, and actually paid well enough for me to finally move out of my tiny one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and neighbors who fought through the walls. My best friend, Josh, had been around since college. He was the guy who could make anyone laugh, the one professors remembered because he cracked jokes without being disrespectful. We'd shared notes, split rent on apartments, and even pooled cash when one of us was short on groceries. But Josh never really had a plan. He floated between odd jobs and temporary gigs, always confident something better would come along. When I started working on my resume, he asked if he could take a look at it for inspiration. I didn't think twice. Friends do that for each other, right? Here's the thing about ambition. It reveals more about people than they want you to know. When you're chasing something big, the people around you show whether they're truly rooting for you or just waiting for their own chance. And sometimes, their way of getting ahead isn't about merit, it's about convenience. You probably know someone like that. The friend who calls their last-minute scramble being resourceful, or who shrugs off crossing lines because everybody does it. I had no clue at the time that Josh didn't just read my resume. He copied chunks of it, my format, my bullet points, even phrasing I'd stayed up at 2 in the morning rewriting to sound sharp but natural. And then he sent it out to the very same company I had applied to. I didn't find out right away. I was still refreshing my email daily, hoping for a callback. When it came, I thought it was finally my shot. But the first text I got wasn't from the firm. It was from Josh. And it knocked me flat. Josh's text was casual, like he was sharing a funny meme. Guess who just got an interview at Stratwell Consulting? That name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Stratwell, the job I'd been obsessing over. I stared at my phone, rereading his message, trying to convince myself he must have applied to a different role or maybe a different office. But no, Stratwell only had one opening listed in Columbus. I called him right away. He picked up sounding excited, buzzing with energy the way he always did when he stumbled into something big. He went on about how surprised he was to get a response so quickly, how he didn't even think his resume was all that strong. But apparently it worked. The longer he talked, the more I realized I recognized every line he was describing. That wasn't his resume. It was mine. Have you ever had that moment where your body reacts before your brain fully catches up? My jaw clenched, my chest tightened, and I couldn't figure out whether I wanted to shout or just hang up. I finally managed. Josh, are you telling me you used my resume? He laughed, like I'd just caught him on a harmless prank. Man, relax. I just borrowed some of your wording. You know I needed a leg up. We're both trying to make it, right? That's the excuse people lean on when they blur the lines between support and sabotage. It's not a big deal. I just tweaked a little. They minimize it, make you feel petty for even caring. But deep down, you know something was stolen. And it's not just words on a page. It's your effort, your late nights, your identity packaged into a career story you crafted carefully. I tried to keep my voice steady. Josh, that's not cool. I worked hard on that, and we applied to the same job. There was a pause, and then he shrugged it off again, saying, Hey, if they called me first, maybe that's a sign. Don't worry, you'll get your shot too. But that's not how it works. Companies don't call everyone back. Sometimes they glance at one application, see what they like, and that's it. And if the one they looked at was a near duplicate of yours, you can guess who ends up ignored. When I hung up, my phone felt heavy in my hand. A strange thought crept in. Had my best friend just cut me off at the knees for the one opportunity I'd been chasing for months? The next few days were a blur of frustration. I kept refreshing my inbox, hoping against hope Stratwell might still email me. Nothing came. Meanwhile, Josh couldn't stop talking about his upcoming interview. He dropped little details in our group chat, what shirt he was planning to wear, how he Googled common consulting questions, even how he thought the recruiter sounded impressed on the phone. He wasn't gloating outright, but every message was like sandpaper against an open cut. You know how people reveal themselves when success is near? Some get humbled, some get grateful, and others get inflated. Josh was leaning hard into inflated. He spun it like he'd pulled off something clever. Man, sometimes you just gotta be bold, you know? Take what works and run with it. Bold. That was his word for it. But really, it was shortcutting, using someone else's grind because he hadn't done the work himself. Part of me wanted to confront him again, to lay it out in plain terms. This wasn't some random idea he'd borrowed, it was theft. But another part of me froze, because what if calling him out too harshly ruined the friendship entirely? We'd been through years together, study sessions, broke road trips, late-night debates over pizza. Cutting him off felt unthinkable, yet letting this slide made me feel like I was letting myself be trampled. I started noticing little things I hadn't paid attention to before, like how often Josh borrowed money, ideas, even clothes, always with the promise he'd return them, though he rarely did. At the time, it felt like harmless give and take, but looking back, the pattern was clear. Josh took, and I rationalized it because we were friends. Maybe you've done the same, overlooked small betrayals because you told yourself loyalty mattered more. 3 days before his interview, I finally got an email from Stratwell. My heart jumped, but the subject line read, "Thank you for your application." It was a polite rejection, the kind that doesn't explain why, just says the position is moving forward with other candidates. I sat there staring at the screen, and the truth sank in. My chance was gone. That night, Josh called me, voice buzzing with nerves. "Bro, can you run me through some mock questions? You're good at this stuff." I held the phone, listening to his voice, and thought, was I really about to help him ace an interview he only had because he hijacked my resume? I told him I was busy. That was the first time I ever flat out refused Josh something. His silence on the other end was noticeable. He wasn't used to me setting that kind of boundary. He tried to laugh it off, saying, "Man, don't be salty. There'll be other jobs." But his tone carried a little edge, like he knew I was pulling away. When I hung up, I kept pacing my apartment. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't just sting in the moment. It makes you question your own judgment. How had I not seen this coming? How many other times had Josh leaned on me, not out of friendship, but because it was easier than standing on his own? Once you spot the pattern, it's like rewinding years in your mind and realizing all the helping out you thought you were doing was just one-sided. Still, I couldn't completely turn off the part of me that wanted him to succeed. That's the twisted part of loyalty. Even when someone wrongs you, you feel tangled up in their outcome. I imagined him walking into Stratwell, sitting across from the recruiters, spouting lines he cribbed from my resume, and I wondered, would they actually buy it? Would he land the job? The morning of his interview, I saw his text pop up. "Headed in now. Wish me luck." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching job boards again, trying to drown out the thought that he might be stepping into the exact office I dreamed about. Every listing looked dull by comparison, and the unfairness ate at me that he might walk away with a position I'd earned in effort if not in timing. Hours later, Josh called. His voice was practically glowing. "Dude, I think I nailed it. They asked me all this stuff about project coordination, and I just pulled from the examples on the resume. They loved it." He chuckled like it was all a game. I barely said 2 words before getting off the phone. That evening, our mutual friend Lisa messaged me privately. "Hey, is it true Josh got that interview with your company? He was bragging about using your resume." My stomach turned. It wasn't just between us anymore. Now people knew. And the way she phrased it, bragging, made it clear Josh wasn't even pretending to respect the line he crossed. And that's when I realized something. Maybe this wasn't just about a job. Maybe it was about finally seeing who Josh really was. When Lisa's message sank in, I felt this wave of embarrassment. It wasn't only that Josh had taken my shot, it was that he was telling people, like it made him clever. If you've ever been in that spot, you know the humiliation doesn't come from the act itself, but from realizing everyone else might see you as the fool who let it happen. I asked Lisa what exactly Josh had said. She told me he'd been at a bar with some of our old classmates, joking about how easy it was to game the system if you had smart friends willing to do the heavy lifting. She said he laughed, called it teamwork, and even mentioned how I was probably too uptight to mind. Reading her words, my ears burned. That wasn't harmless bragging. That was dismissal. The irony of friendship is that it often hides exploitation under the banner of loyalty. You tell yourself, "That's just how he is," or "He means well," because admitting the truth would mean facing how much of yourself you've given away. But the truth was staring me in the face. Josh saw me as a resource, not a partner. 2 days later, he got the call. Stratwell offered him the job. He texted me in all caps, full of exclamation points. "I'm in! Starts next month. Drinks on me tonight." My phone lit up with mutual friends congratulating him in our group chat. Not one person mentioned me, even though half of them knew I'd been chasing that role for weeks. To them, Josh was the star of the moment. I didn't go to the celebration. I stayed home, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easily someone else could rewrite your story and take the credit. And here's the kicker. Josh didn't see it as betrayal. In his mind, he just won. Some people live like that, always turning life into a competition, even when the person they're racing is the one who stood beside them. By the end of that week, I had stopped answering his calls. He noticed, of course. He sent me texts, some casual, some a little defensive. "Bro, don't be weird about this. We both gotta make it somehow." But the more he tried to normalize it, the clearer it became. He didn't understand the depth of what he'd taken from me. And yet, I couldn't stop wondering, was this the end of our friendship, or just the moment I finally started seeing it for what it always had been? I didn't respond to Josh's texts for a while, but silence never stopped him. He showed up at my apartment one Saturday afternoon with a six-pack, acting like nothing had changed. He dropped onto my couch, cracked open a beer, and started talking about his onboarding packet like we were still in college swapping stories about classes. I sat across from him, arms folded, waiting for him to acknowledge what he'd done. He never did. At one point, he leaned forward and said, "Man, I know you're kinda salty about the whole resume thing, but look, we both wanted it. They picked me. That's just how it goes." He said it like we were two strangers who happened to apply for the same slot, not best friends where one had borrowed the other's identity to get ahead. That's the psychology of entitlement. People who live like that don't register boundaries the way you or I might. They think opportunity is something to grab, no matter whose hand they shove out of the way. And if you call them on it, they'll twist the story until you look unreasonable for even bringing it up. Josh wasn't just avoiding guilt. He truly didn't see the line. I told him flat out, "You didn't just apply. You used my work. That's not a win, Josh. That's stealing." His expression flickered, defensiveness, maybe even a flash of guilt, but then he shrugged. "Dude, companies don't care who wrote the resume. They just want someone who can do the job, and I can do it." Hearing him say that, I realized something unsettling. To Josh, friendship had always been a convenience, not a commitment. If it helped him get further, great. If not, he'd shrug and move on. The years of shared rent, late-night conversations, favors back and forth, those weren't loyalty markers in his mind. They were just steps on his path. I told him I needed space, and for the first time, he didn't fight it. He just grabbed another beer from the six-pack, set it on the table for me like a peace offering, and said, "Suit yourself." Then he left. The apartment was quiet again, but the silence felt heavier than before. I wasn't just processing the job I'd lost. I was processing the version of Josh I believed in, and realizing that person might never have been real. The weeks after that were strange. My phone barely buzzed anymore because Josh had been the one constantly pulling me into plans. Without him, the silence made me realize how much of my social life had revolved around his orbit. He was the guy who rallied people together, who decided what bar we'd go to, who made the group chat feel alive. But I started to notice something else. The messages that did trickle in from others were different. A couple of friends asked quietly if I was okay, if things with Josh had gotten weird. Word had spread faster than I thought. It turns out bragging has a way of backfiring. People enjoy celebrating someone's success, but they don't admire it when it's built on someone else's back. Lisa told me more than once that Josh's victory speech at the bar had rubbed people the wrong way. They might have clapped and cheered in the moment, but privately, some of them started questioning him. That's the thing about character. When cracks show, people remember. Meanwhile, I doubled down on my own applications. I rewrote my resume from scratch, this time making sure it carried my voice in a way no one else could mimic. It felt like reclaiming something, even though it was just a document. But the act itself mattered. Sometimes you need to rebuild what was taken, not because you lost faith in yourself, but because you refused to let someone else define your narrative. Josh and I didn't talk for nearly a month. Then one evening, I got another text from him. This one wasn't celebratory. It was short. "Starting to think this job isn't what I thought. Can we grab a beer?" That's how people like him circle back. They come knocking when their high runs out, when they realize the shiny thing they chase doesn't fill the gap they expected it to. I didn't answer right away. I sat there looking at the screen, weighing the years of history against the fresh wound. Friendship is messy like that. You know someone's flaws, but you also remember their best moments. The question hanging in the air was whether I owed him another chance, or whether letting go was the only way to stop repeating the cycle. And just as I was leaning toward ignoring him, another message came through, one that changed the whole equation. The second message read, "They figured it out. HR asked me why parts of my resume looked recycled. Did you tell them?" I froze. My first reaction was disbelief. Josh had been so smug, so sure he'd pulled it off. Now he sounded shaken. I hadn't told anyone at Stratwell. Honestly, I'd wanted to, but I assumed it wouldn't matter. Big companies don't usually care about backstories. They care about filling positions. But apparently someone there had noticed. Maybe the recruiter had compared applications. Or maybe Josh slipped during small talk. However it happened, the truth was clawing its way to the surface. People underestimate how much employers look for consistency. They don't just want skills, they want authenticity. And when your story doesn't add up, when your voice sounds borrowed, it shows. That's what had happened to Josh. He was trying to live inside words that weren't his, and it cracked under pressure. Later that night, he called me. His voice was flat, almost defensive. "They asked me about projects I never worked on. Stuff from your resume. I tried to wing it, but it didn't land. They said they'd be in touch. I think I'm screwed." Hearing that, I felt a tangle of emotions, part satisfaction, part pity, and part exhaustion. That's the irony of shortcuts. They might get you through the door, but they can't carry you once you're inside. People like Josh believe confidence will patch every hole, but confidence without substance is just noise. And eventually, someone notices. After the call, I sat in my apartment staring at the beer he'd left behind weeks earlier. It was still in the fridge, unopened. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Done trying to make sense of his choices. Done letting his chaos bleed into my life. The next morning, I finally replied to his texts. "No, I didn't tell them. You did this to yourself." I hit send, then muted the conversation. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't waiting on him to decide what happened next. But just when I thought the story had ended there, a surprising twist came from Stratwell itself. A week later, I got an email from Stratwell. At first, I thought it was another rejection template, but when I opened it, my heart skipped. The subject line read, "Follow-up, application review." The recruiter explained they had recently revisited my resume while resolving some discrepancies with another candidate. They wanted to know if I was still available to interview. I sat back in my chair, stunned. For weeks, I'd carried the weight of losing out to Josh, and now the same company was circling back. It was like the universe had quietly reset the board. But it wasn't luck. It was the simple fact that truth has a way of holding up, even when lies collapse under pressure. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I walked into Stratwell's downtown office with my new, rebuilt resume in hand. This time, everything on the page was mine. No borrowed phrasing, no shared lines. The recruiter smiled as we shook hands and said, "We appreciate your patience. Integrity matters here, and it stood out that your application was consistent." That word, integrity, stuck with me all through the interview. Meanwhile, Josh had gone quiet. Our mutual friends told me he'd stopped showing up to group hangs, claiming he was busy with work. Though everyone knew the truth, he didn't have the job anymore. The shine had worn off, and he didn't want to face the same people he'd bragged to weeks earlier. That's the cycle of hollow wins. When they collapse, the silence that follows is louder than the celebration ever was. My interview went well. I didn't try to oversell. I just answered honestly, drawing on real projects I'd worked on in school and internships. For once, I wasn't haunted by what Josh might say or do. It was just me, presenting my story, and the recruiter nodded like it was exactly what they wanted to hear. When I left the building, I didn't know if I had the job yet, but I knew one thing: whatever happened, it would be on my terms. And that felt like the first real win I'd had in a long time. A few days later, my phone rang with a Columbus area code. I didn't even need to answer to know it was Stratwell. But the bigger question wasn't whether I'd finally landed the role. It was what I'd do when Josh inevitably came back into the picture. The call from Stratwell was short and to the point. They offered me the position. I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside I was buzzing. After all the frustration, all the late nights reworking my resume, and all the drama with Josh, I had landed the job, and it was mine, earned, not borrowed. I didn't rush to tell anyone. This time, I wanted the news to settle in privately before the congratulations poured in. Later that week, I shared it with Lisa and a couple of close friends who had supported me through the fallout. Their reactions were warm, genuine, not the hollow cheers people give when they're clapping for someone who cut corners. That difference mattered. Of course, Josh found out. He texted me late one night. "Heard you got it. Guess it worked out for you after all." The words were plain, but I could read the sting behind them. He wanted me to reply, maybe to offer some reassurance that we were still good, that none of this had changed our friendship. But I didn't. Some silences don't need filling. Here's what I realized. Losing something unfairly doesn't define you. How you respond afterward does. I could have let bitterness sit in me, could have kept replaying the betrayal. Instead, I rebuilt, kept moving, and eventually the right people noticed. That's the psychology of resilience. It's not about ignoring pain, but about refusing to let it write your ending. As for Josh, he drifted further out of my orbit. Last I heard, he'd picked up another short-term gig, already spinning it as a stepping stone. Maybe he'll land somewhere, maybe he won't. But it's not my job to carry him there anymore. Starting at Stratwell felt like more than just a career step. It felt like reclaiming my voice. And if you've ever had someone take credit for your effort, you know that's the sweetest victory. Not proving them wrong, but proving yourself right.